adversity is like what controls the allocation of resources. If I think about the most interesting people I know, the most interesting people that I've kind of had exposure to them, they all dealt with some sort of adversity that shaped them. As I was coming of age as a professional, as a grown up, I've been lucky enough to come of age in a period that had the likes of Mandela out there, and I was in East Timor, and I've had some sort of exposure to some of the bigger than life characters that defined the late 90s, the mid 90s, the late 90s, the early 2000s, and that made us think that it's possible to build a society or a nation on profound values. Which one would you want to be? You want to be the super wealthy, can't sleep at night, everybody hates you person, or you want to be the just chilled and have a wonderful life and community and friends and family around you type of person? It's an interesting question.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is another episode of Useful Philosophy Discussions. With me today is Iulian Circo. Welcome, Iulian.
Thank you, Rogerio. Pleasure to be here.
So very briefly, I met Iulian a couple of years ago and collaborated a bit with him. Learned a bit regarding several domains, IT, and also attitudes regarding work ethics and all. Very briefly, my very removed glance of Iulian's trajectory throughout his career has been basically three phases. A first phase with humanitarian aid, involving humanitarian aid. A second phase involving big public projects, and then a third phase that involves quite a bit of serial entrepreneurship. So and also there has been a lot of interesting lessons, I think, to be learned from such a rich life that I briefly touched upon in some of our conversations while we were collaborating. Some of the things that you told me actually really struck me like a truck, basically. Before we get to that, I would like to ask you if my account of your life is accurate, if you would like to add anything.
No, that's it. It's quite accurate. Yeah, I mean, I had three big careers, I guess. I've spent a lot of time in what you'd call humanitarian post-conflict kind of settings. I've done, I've had another career in just running big operations involving public health, but also other sort of development-related projects. And then I've become an entrepreneur. That's basically it. Yeah.
One of the things that I learned about your trajectory was you started out in Romania. You were born and grew up there, and you decided to become to study law with a specialization in human rights. While you were studying law, you probably studied many wisdom related fields. There's quite a lot of philosophical thought in law and also humanitarian aid. So please tell us about your relationship with philosophy. Are there thinkers who stood out as sources to draw life lessons from?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a classic student of philosophy, to be honest. And as you said, I grew up in the twilight zone on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, with relative little exposure or access to what you would call classic philosophy. I've had an impressionable teenage phase when I was drawn into, literature with strong commentary on the human condition. Philip K. Dick was a big hero of mine. I was big into Borges at a certain point, but not a student of philosophy as such. However, my studies, and yeah, you're right to point out that human rights law is basically the field of legal science that's structured around philosophy or around kind of profound values, and that's something that it kind of always resonated with me. Probably because of my upbringing, probably because of what I've been exposed to. And I mean, it's been a wonderful field to study and to try to get deeper into. And then through my work, I guess I've had firsthand exposure to the ups and downs of human nature, the really ugly, but also the really profound. And in context like that, you want to have some sort of system of values that's universal, right? That doesn't apply to us to a very strict kind of situation, what traditional law would do. And I mean, that's kind of the generation that I've been part of this generation, and I guess as I was coming of age as a professional, as a grown up, I've been lucky enough to come of age in a period that had the likes of Mandela out there, and I mean, I was in East Timor, and I've had some sort of exposure to some of the bigger than life characters that defined the late 90s, the mid 90s, the late 90s, the early 2000s, and that made us think that it's possible to build a society or a nation on profound values, and if you think back at the post-apartheid South Africa was a wonderful kind of thing in terms of the way that they thought about constitution, the way they thought about reconciliation. Same thing in East Timor, same thing in a few other places. So that period was a period of sort of optimism when it comes to now we can build nations and societies that are a bit more they're a bit more respectful and inclusive. Turns out it wasn't that easy, and there was a bit of a backlash after that, but that's the era in which I came of age, and I guess I came of age also philosophically in that year.
Yeah, so it sounds like you would be kind of like a peer of very active philosophical minds, like that brief period when Plato actually tried to change a regime by participating in the court of a tyrant, but it didn't go very well. The tyrant actually almost sentenced Plato to death, and then he had to go away, probably because Plato's ideas didn't jive well with this tyrant called Dionysius who wanted to do. There's also the example of a neo-Confucian from the 16th century called Wang Yangmin, who was very, very active politically, and he shaped a lot of history because he engaged with so many different aspects of professional life, being like a military tactician, a member of parliament, and etc., etc. And so it's very, very different. These kinds of people who actually engage with life and engage with society. Another one is, of course, Marcus Aurelius, but he didn't have anyone telling him that he couldn't do something because he was the emperor himself. But the lessons from them I tend to pay a bit more attention to, because they actually did stuff. They actually were engaged with society in sometimes profound ways. Probably they made mistakes, and mistakes in those positions when we are engaging at scale in society, they cost dearly, and so it's really, really important to put in practice lessons that actually work. So my question would be, so would you say that you tended to gain more wisdom, more life lessons from actually doing things than book learning, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I can associate myself with any form of wisdom, to be honest. Like if you have a cat, the cat learns pretty quickly that she shouldn't sit on the stove, right? Is that wisdom? I'm not sure. In Southern Africa, where I spent quite a few years, people traditionally used to put beehives around their crops because elephants are afraid of beehives, which is kind of funny. Is it wisdom? I'm not sure. It's even ironic because elephants seem to be more afraid of bees than of humans, which is a glitch, I guess, in their code, because humans are way more dangerous to elephants than bees, right? But they are afraid of bees because they've learned over generation that bees can sting, and that's really painful. So that's the share of learning that I've done throughout my life. Particularly as a young man. And as I'm aging, I'm trying to learn more from others. I think that's an improvement in my approach to learning. And I also say it's like a generational thing, right? Like where I grew up, there was no internet. The internet's changed our ability to learn. And I think that for better or worse, we have shifted the way that we learn, and that's mostly a good thing, right? Like we have a whole generation of people now that have playbooks for everything, right? You have a playbook for pretty much any challenge in life. You run into some challenge, you Google it, there's a playbook. How to study, how to be efficient in studying, how to cook, how to create social interactions, how to make friends, how to behave on a first date, how to apply for jobs, how to smash an interview, how to speak to people. Like there's playbooks for everything, which makes us very efficient as a society, but it also removes us from the old school trial and error to some extent. It dulls our appetite to experiment, to just go for things, just do things. We are very low tolerance to being embarrassed, to being uncomfortable. And yeah, I mean, it makes people less tolerant to risk and maybe less tolerant to their own and to other people's failure. And that's probably not good. I would say overall, the ability to learn and to have information, and you have a playbook for everything, it's awesome. And as a person who builds businesses with very small teams, I love a playbook. But what does it do at the level of our individual ability to deal with challenges? I'm not sure.
Yeah, following a playbook, could we say that it is wisdom? I'm not so sure. I don't think so. If a playbook can be followed equally well by a computer that doesn't even know, doesn't have arguably any consciousness, doesn't know what it's doing, a bit like a Chinese box experiment, where the guy that knows nothing of Chinese is inside and he's just pairing the phrases of Chinese according to a rule book, and the other person outside is fooled into having a conversation, a meaningful conversation. Well, maybe that's a bit of what it is we call Methodism. So you reminded me of a lesson I got from studying Roman thoughts from Galen. Galen was a doctor. And when we talk about playbooks, medicine is always a really nice example because it's very complex. And if people, like in Galen's time, there were doctors that just followed the playbook and didn't even think. Galen would scathingly criticize them because they are engaging in a very complex domain where things vary from person to person. And if they are just being Methodists unthinkingly executing code, they will tend to try to think that one solution fits all, and that's not the case. And probably the same is for businesses as well. If you try one thing in somewhere around Europe, it might work, but if you try it in Africa, it might be disastrous, basically, because you are engaging with completely different cultural landscapes, different people with different values in some respects. And maybe one thing that can be extricated from playbooks is maybe there are some things in common with different playbooks of different places. If that is the case, maybe these commonalities might constitute something that is more timeless, that is more, that's a ground level kind of thing. So maybe every single human being is mortal, and this is a truth for everyone, regardless of culture. And also, we are short-lived. We can become ill, so everyone, this is a thing that is common regardless of how rich or poor, or whether you are living in one place of the earth or another. And if people, yeah, people might start with rule books, but it's really important to put them in their proper place. It's like they are like advisors, and you can take their advice or reject their advice, like a wise king with their advisors.
Yeah. No, and I mean, there's definitely a place for playbooks. I happen to be a fan of playbooks. I just, I mean, I'm just thinking like in the context of acquiring wisdom, particularly when you do it through, like you acquire wisdom through trial and error, in your formative stage of life. If you're expected to run with a playbook, you'll find it harder to learn alternatives. You'll find it harder to build some sort of knowledge around that particular topic, because you're just running with the code that someone else has written. And this is like, I don't have a strong opinion on how this will evolve or what this actually means. It's just that in my own journey, I didn't have the playbook at those stages. I didn't have a lot of playbooks. And in a way, that's created the person that I am today, for better or worse.
Yeah, with a person that is too overly attached to a playbook, they might become too rigid, and then they will have a hard time letting go of the playbook to try out some different things. While a person like you described of yourself, starting with no playbook, you had no choice but being quite versatile and malleable, and try to see what fits where, and also probably such a situation might build a nice tolerance for error and mistakes, uh, embracing the mistakes and the errors as well. They are part of life, instead of just letting them kind of put you down or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So in one of the most enlightening conversations I have enjoyed, I learned from you that adversity is not necessarily the ugly appearance it presents superficially. If we scrutinize it attentively and wisely, whatever that might mean, adversity can instead be formative. Uh, to avoid painting our experiences and what we perceive with a black palette, do you think we must acquire a more diverse palette to paint our experiences more justly? Concretely, what helped you look at your humanitarian aid activities in war-torn nations in a light where you say with a conviction they were formative experiences to you, rather than something that you might want to forget or something like that?
Well, I mean, I think obviously adversity is formative, definitely. And I think this is actually one of the forces of the universe. Across the board, adversity is formative. I mean, evolution itself is a product of adversity, right? You're you're encountering an adverse hostile environment, and you adapt to that. You find the one thing that makes you thrive in that environment. Adversity, scarcity, they're forces of nature, and it's something that I think we understand pretty well now. And I mean, we reflect it into everyday things in our life. People go to the gym. Why do you go to the gym? You manufacture adversity because that develops your body. It makes your body stronger. Athletes are basically students of adversity, and it works for them, right? And we've actually fine-tuned our relationship with adversity in those areas. Um, you know, that to the point where modern day athletes are capable of feats that would have been impossible to imagine a while ago. And that's the work of adversity. Um, you probably know, do you know the story of the biosphere experiment in Arizona? This is like one of those stories that's often kind of quoted, that they have this biosphere experiment where for like 10 years they try to recreate an ecosystem, the basically the Earth ecosystem, as I guess as a study of whether that's possible to do, on other planets or whatever.
It was actually called Biosphere 2, right? Because Biosphere.
Yeah, yeah, because Biosphere 1 is the Earth. Yeah, yeah. So Biosphere 2, that's the one. That's the one. And the thing that's all often kind of quoted from this experiment is that trees would grow to a certain height and then they just collapse under their own weight. And it turns out that what was missing from Biosphere 2 was the wind, which a tree needs. As the tree grows, it needs wind to kind of apply stress on its fiber so that it can kind of hold. And without wind, it just crashes and collapses, right?
Wow, that's a crazy realization.
Yeah, but that's the law of nature. Like, nature, adversity is like what controls the allocation of resources in nature, for better or worse, right? And I think that's true for people as well. I mean, if I think about the most interesting people I know, the most interesting people that I've kind of had exposure to them, they all dealt with some sort of adversity that shaped them, either in childhood or later on. And it's something that you also see at the level of a collective culture, right? Like, if you spend any time in a wealthy, comfortable society, you will notice that there's relative low levels of empathy or kind of community vibes, right? Like, you take a stroll through San Francisco or New York, you just watch people basically walking over half dead homeless people on their way to pick up their soy latte, because that's kind of like the empathy is just not there. There's like a homeless person half dead on the sidewalk. People won't even call an ambulance. It's kind of strange, but that's what it is. And then if you go and take a trip to Palestine or to Afghanistan, you will experience something very, very different, right? Like, there's an incredible level of collective empathy. There's very strong informal support structures. Communities are very vibrant. They're very visible. The fiber of the society is defined by communities. And there's some correlation there. I can't really explain it, and I don't know what the causation is, but the correlation's definitely there. And as a parent, is an interesting thing to contemplate, because it's a source of conflict, right? Like, on the one hand, you know that adversity will shape your kids into strong, functional adults, but you also want them to have a life devoid of trauma and suffering and hardship. So it's a very hard thing to balance as a parent, but it's definitely clear that adversity is formative. And in terms of my own journey, since that's what you asked, I don't know about adversity, but by temperament and by nature, I've always been drawn by adventure, right? Like, if I draw a line through my eclectic kind of journey, non-linear, adventure has been a constant, and it's been a constant filter to my decision making. I've always tried to choose the path of higher adventure potential, and I think that most people are happier when they get exposed to some adventure along the way, I mean, I'm personally working actively to keep a level of adventure as a constant in my life, even, I'm like at the stage where I am in my life. And I always say that, I mean, you'll never run into an 80-year-old person who'd be like, hey, Rogerio, I had a wonderful life and everything. I just wish I would have had less adventure, Like, that's just something that no one's going to say, No one's going to be like, wow, my life, I've lived this fulfilling life, but I wish it was more boring, I wish I could have had less adventure in my life. I don't think that's someone that you'll encounter very often, So that's kind of a guiding principle in my life.
Yeah, but this reminds me of a very interesting and funny episode in when I read Plato's Republic. He would write that Odysseus, who was really the adventure guy, he chose in his second life to be a kind of a really modest craftsman, no adventure, nothing at all. So I thought that was really interesting because it really contrasts very much with what you just said, and probably he didn't know better. People really can thrive from adventure, from hardships, but maybe so many near deaths by Odysseus, and probably he had enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's levels. I think there's levels of adventure, right? Like, I think you don't want a lot of life-threatening. It gets old after a while, but it's also a state of mind. Like, it's also it's embracing some unknown in your life. It's embracing some unexpected in your life. It's it's embracing some lack of comfort in your journey. Why not? I mean, I think I personally think that that's something that helps you being a more rounded person.
There has been a question in my mind, very much related to this that you just relate, which is, why do young people have this choice of choosing hardship and also adventure, of course, or choose a less interesting, less exciting life, but they have kind of synthetic adventure in it, in the form of video games, popular culture, being sports fans, etc. Also, other uh, pleasant activities that entertain the mind for a long time, and that it can consume the strength, vigor, energy of youth. And it seems to me that you have described a frame of mind that can help people that are starting their adult lives to choose wisely, to choose something where they might grow as human beings, instead of choosing another thing or another group of things that will consume them basically little by little. And this is a very ancient idea. This is something very old. There's something that has been relayed to us through the ancient Greeks called the Hercules choice, which is Hercules was at the beginning of his adult life confronted by two goddesses, one representing vice, and she brought gaming, wine, parties, entertainment, a life of leisure, easy life, but of course a life that would not build a hero kind of person. And then a hard life with these 12 labors and challenges and terrifying beasts to subdue or capture or slay, and a very hard road indeed, with precipices and etc. And the fable is that the myth is that the Hercules chose the hard path. He saw through the deception of this goddess of vice called Kakia. He saw that she was kind of giving a rose tinted thing that looks nice, but is not good. It's not the correct thing. It's not the ethical choice to make. While the other thing, the other path, the hard path, it might be hard, especially at the beginning when the person is still untrained, relatively. But the hardship will feel better with time. It just needs patience, determination, and I think that your frame of mind of looking at it as adventure instead of looking at it as potential future drudgery, I think it really can balance the scales for young people that are even if subconsciously making this choice every single day of their lives. I think it's a really interesting piece of advice there. Um, another thing that I also wanted to tackle with you. You once told me that the worst kinds of personalities are not to be found in environments where material scarcity and lack of physical safety prevail. Instead, they are much more easily found in comfortable offices located in luxurious neighborhoods. At the time, you even used Silicon Valley as a concrete example. Since in your path you have likely been in both environments, being both a person who worked in war-torn countries as a humanitarian worker, and as you have been working in IT in the IT space, probably you have had encounters with the other extreme. So since in your path you have likely been in these two environments, since Romania, has this changed your view on human nature?
I mean, this is a corollary of what I was saying earlier, right? People who've had a comfortable life, they tend to attribute this to themselves somehow. And they develop this unsufferable sense of entitlement. I think you know what I mean. Somehow we as human beings tend to ignore the gazillions of factors that are outside of our control that made us be in this situation, right? Like it's very seductive to look back at your life or at your achievement or at your failure and to draw a red line to say this is what happens. This is the correlation. And when we do that, we tend to give ourselves a lot of credit when we're successful, and we tend to not give ourselves credit when there's a failure. Oh, it wasn't me, it was the economy, it was whatever. And if that's the only exposure that you've had, that leads to a certain level of arrogance, and it leads to this ability to shut down empathy. The stepping over the homeless person in San Francisco that I've mentioned. And yeah, I mean, you also tend to rationalize, other people's plight as self-made. Yeah, so we ignore all these factors that contribute to where we are, whether success or failure. And some of them are quite profound. I mean, if you were born in a village in Eastern Congo, your ability to be successful by the definition of like Twitter would be very, very low, regardless of your personal effort, right? Or your personal kind of skills. It's just you're in a village in Eastern Congo. It doesn't mean that you're not successful. If there is a superior definition of success, the idea of success, but you're not successful in the let me do a Twitter thread to tell you how to be successful definition, right? So this is something that I think it's worth thinking about as we go about life. I believe strongly that the majority of people that enjoy success are basically a product of factors that have never been in their control. This applies to me. This applies, I think, to everyone who's successful. And I mean, there's a ton of good stuff written about this, actually. Like where you were born, who your parents were, what's your zip code in the United States, where you went to school. All of these are such powerful factors that have nothing to do with our own skills or our own temperament or our own value. Yet they define your success by these Western modern standards, which is why parents spend a ton of money to move to good areas into towns, which is why people, pay a lot of money for their university degrees where they don't actually learn things that are useful in life, but they are part of a community that will then support them as they go up. But the question is, does this make us better people? Does it make these people more interesting to be around, more fun to be around? Are these the people that we want to learn from? It's not clear, And now you take this arrogance, this giving ourselves a lot of credit for our success, and you add to the mix this other human tendency to think that solutions to faraway problems are simple. There's like this reductionism that we have. You sit somewhere in Europe and you say, oh, let me go to Africa and try to solve the hunger problem there, or let me explain in this Twitter thread how to fix the conflict in Palestine or in Ukraine, or it's very seductive to think that the solution is simple. And this is something that some of the most intelligent people of our generation fall for this. I mean, whatever happens that captures the attention of the media or the zeitgeist at a certain point, be it COVID, just in the last few years, Ukrainian conflict, Afghanistan, you have all these random people, from football players to finance bros to, who have opinions on how to solve this faraway problem that they have no idea about. And somehow it works. And somehow decisions get taken on these sort of seductive ideas. I mean, I keep going back to Afghanistan because I was there just as the conflict started in 2003, and it's amazing to see that after 20-something years and trillions of dollars spent, countless lives lost, nothing has happened by any definition of progress. And you have to wonder why. If the, you know, like, money is not an issue, boots on the ground is not an issue, ideas are not short. Somehow there's this huge collective failure by history's most wealthy, most advanced scientifically nation to bring some sort of structure or peace to a medieval society, basically.
That's a really profound example that you just gave, which makes me wonder: did the people who attempted to solve such a complex entity, basically, to try to rehabilitate such a complex entity, which could be we could be talking about a nation like Afghanistan, or a person that has problems, psychiatric problems.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing.
Can you solve the problem of a complex entity by just applying code, running code like a rule book? Probably not. Maybe you need to get to know that person or that nation and relate to that person or that nation at a deeper level, and probably that nation will change you and you will change that nation or that person in the process. And so maybe there, if Afghanistan has a culture that resisted all of that, maybe they have something made of adamantium in terms of culture that we don't know about, and maybe it's really important to know about it, because people like, for instance, Plato, they were envious of the age of Egypt, the duration of Egypt and Babylon. He was envious of that, of how they could hold a culture working for 10,000 years, like something like that. And he really wanted to imprint that in his place, in his polis, his Athens. He failed because, for instance, Hinduism is still alive, and they are still have temples that were built in Plato's time, but nothing of Plato's time, of the cultural things, temples and whatnot, survived to our day. So ultimately, I would say, even though philosophers like to study his writings, his attempts failed. And while his attempt failed, you can see Afghanistan still going with their kind of way to do things, their way to stay in medieval age, like you said, and even resisted a huge titanic country like the United States, with all these trillions of investment that they I think they're if Afghanistan will be almost in the same place as it was in the 80s, 90s, before anything happened. It's just a matter of time. It even seems that while the invasions happened, and the American troops were holding the country, the these Talibans and other groups that are associated with the more traditional aspect of what is the identity of Afghanistan, they were reverently raising newer generations since the early 2000s till today. They grew up and are now young adults, and they are maintaining this culture. They raise these guys with a strong determination in how they raise a new generation to keep the same system running, basically. So this is my interpretation from outside of what happened, and I wonder if you find any agreement or any point that this is the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as we said, it's just a lot more complex than it looks from where you're far away. And I think that the lesson here is to avoid this trap of thinking it's easy. Um, it's almost like a philosophical or a life lesson. The further away a problem is, the easier it seems to be to solve. But if you get closer, you realize that it's a lot more complicated, and maybe there isn't a simple solution, to it. Um, And I think it applies to, as you said, to complex societal problems as much as it applies to individual kind of journeys and choices. And I don't have a solution. All I know is that I'm trying to resist that seduction of saying, "Oh, it's easy. Let me make a thread to explain to you how to do this."
Yeah, if one thing we could learn from the ancient cultures is hubris is a really dangerous thing. This form of arrogance, thinking that we can overcome huge forces of nature, and these forces of nature might be these very long-lasting cultures that are so entrenched that they are actually a force of nature that you cannot subdue. And if you think that you can subdue, it's a bit like the gods will mess with you. They will uh, they will show you how wrong you are by things kind of backlashing and things working really really wrong. It's funny how tragic myths from old, from thousands of years ago, and we see history playing, and you just don't have the explicit god there saying, well, I told you so, don't be so hubristic. You should learn some really painful lessons from this. So I find it really interesting how people maybe today there is such an abundance of hubris that it will provide lessons that are really hard to swallow, and maybe they can come at a delay, but I think that they will come. As you mentioned before, Julian, there are many people who have this delusion of being a self-made man or a self-made woman, and that they owe nothing to anything else outside of them. That is a really, really dangerous proposition. It might work, ignorance might be bliss for a while, but it's like karma. Karma will come back eventually, and they will this ignorance and hubris will yield these painful lessons. It's like people who are exposed to very little adversity, and they kind of fall into these mindsets of arrogance and hubris, of self being self-made. Yeah, and maybe people unknowingly are trying to make things harder for them when they are in a very comfortable society. They're kind of like bike shedding, inventing trivial problems to engage with. But that's also a mistake, because they will not be engaging with the bigger problems. They will not be relating to the problems in the first place. They need to relate to them in the first place, to get to know these other peoples, to get to know these other countries, and even to know if what they're thinking of as a problem is a problem in the first place. Because some things that we think, oh, these people do things wrong in their other countries, in the third world, maybe they're doing something way more efficient than we are doing in our North Europe and North America or something like that. Maybe we should look at them with more humility, and with less arrogance, so that we may learn as well. Maybe this you can relate to this as well, because you've been to many countries.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, I think there's a whole conversation there to be had about the definition of success and the definition of self-driven, and like, and I think the very nature of intelligence, actually, because you have people who are intelligent by any modern definition of intelligence, yet they are a mess in terms of their personal life. Their relationships don't really exist. Their family doesn't want to have anything to do with them. They don't seem like very happy people. Um, and that's quite interesting. And then you have the opposite. You have people who maybe are not successful by that definition, but they enjoy, the support of a wonderful community, and they are loved by their family, and they don't, their life every day is kind of, pleasant, and it gives them satisfaction. And maybe they're not wealthy, and maybe they don't have that success that kind of the modern definition would expect them to have. Yet, are they successful? Maybe they are. maybe, which one would you want to be? You want to be the super wealthy, can't sleep at night, everybody hates you person, or you want to be the just chilled and have a wonderful life and community and friends and family around you type of person? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, again, this question has been asked and tried to attempted to answer, as I found, for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
uh, yeah, there is actually like a story from ancient India, in one of the stories that they call the Upanishads, where a child is castigated by his father for being too asking too many questions about a ritual. And his father, by answering his question, "Father, if you're giving everything to death, uh, will you what will you do with me as well? I'm also a possession of yours." And he says, "I will give you to death too." And so he took a hint, the kid took a hint and went to the temple of death. And he had to stay there for 3 days and 3 nights without anyone receiving him, because death was doing something else somewhere else. But when death returned to his abode, he welcomed the child. The child was called Nachiketas, and death, called Yama in ancient Indian tradition, uh, said, "Well, since I've left you here without any food, water, any hospitality for 3 days, I will grant you 3 wishes." And then the kid only asked to get along with his father, first wish. The second wish, to know how to do these proper rituals correctly, so he can also help his dad, because his dad was also engaged, very much engaged with that. And then the third question, the third boon that he asked the Yama, is way more universal even. The child asked the god, what happens to humans after death? And the god tried to evade giving this boon to him. He wanted to test the child with massive wealth, with everything that's every physical and material comforts you could imagine in your life, except this wisdom about whatever it is that is essential in the cosmos, and what happens to humans after death. The kid refused all the dangling prizes that the god was offering him. And then the god engaged with him, telling him profound lessons about human psychology, and things that what it is that how a human souls works like, and why is it a good idea to put wealth and material wealth in its proper place, relative to other things that are much more important, like getting along with your family, for one, getting along with the community, having a really pleasant life without unnecessary stresses that just come from you becoming too attached to stuff that really doesn't matter. But people just value that stuff because society just normalizes it, and people go with the bandwagon. And so this and many other stories like it, of course there's many more, this is just an example, um, show highlights that it's really important to um, see how our values are placed. So we place much value in material possessions, and little to our friendships and our relationships with our families and our community. Well, then you will have a very, very different lifestyle. Maybe you won't like it after, at the end of your life, to have devoted your entire life to stuff that is perishable anyway. This, all the money and stuff and wealth and treasure, you won't take it with you. But if you really engage well with a community, even after you depart, your imprint will be left in this community. So people like Marcus Aurelius, Siddhartha, Socrates, they left their imprint in humanity to this day. And even some of them didn't write a word, like Socrates and the Buddha. Their influence is still here. It's almost like they're still here in spirit. And so this is a kind of a hint for us to think about what matters.
It's interesting how we've developed methodologies for the first definition of success, right? Like, as a child, you go to school, they teach you how to learn a skill which will help you earn money. They teach you how to do, like, there's a lot of structure to how to become financially successful, and that's kind of important. I'm not saying it's not, but there's a lot of education around it, right? And there's a lot of, the perception is that this is something that you should study and you should teach your children and you should learn in school and you should go to university and learn more of this. But there's not a lot of the other, there's not a lot of methodology to the other form of intelligence, right? And again, like, not many 80-year-olds or 90-year-olds sit surrounded by the nurses and the family and say, oh, I had a wonderful life, I should have spent more time away from my children so I can make more money, I should have sat into more meetings that I hated, or it's not something you can imagine would happen a lot. Yet our priorities, our decisions, the expectations, the pressures that we put on ourselves, and the methodologies that we bring into our education system form us to think like that, right? Like, if you're not doing some job that's super annoying and super stressful and having meeting with people you don't actually like, and people look at you that you're kind of wasting your life in a way, and it's quite interesting. And I'm curious to see how this will evolve now with AI and with so much automation, and maybe this could be an opportunity for us to redefine the nature of intelligence.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question to ask and think about in this day and age, especially with these transformations like from AI. But not only these transformations from AI, many youth have turned or are turning their back on institutions like religion. And although people might not agree with the mythology or the story or the doctrine of religion, there's a lot of value from these groups because they offer a sense of community and ritual, and people do stuff together and with purpose and meaning and whatnot. And people become completely secular and also completely materialist. And as you said, we've institutionalized the training of the attainment of one very narrow dimension of success, and it corresponds to faculties of intellect and creativity as well, maybe some networking in the business sense, but then to foster community, to do something repeatedly like the Epicureans would do. They would come together and talk about philosophy, talk about wisdom, just for the sake of building wisdom and community, all the same. But I think people might have been throwing the baby away with the bathwater of turning entirely their backs on religion without at least trying to extract something of value, something of wisdom for people to keep building these other faculties that they also have, like compassionate love, which in ancient Greek is called agape. So people, even before, so they forgive, they give before even other people are even thinking of giving. They express gratitude even without an explicit reason to express gratitude. So I really think that if people get more time in their hands thanks to AI and automation, I think it's not just an interesting thing for people to devote more time and energy to these other faculties, besides alongside intellect and creativity, but I think it's imperative to do so. Otherwise, we might be moving into a very, very shaky society where some people just embrace AI and they become like very super powerful in terms of materialistically, and they are devoid from society, from they are detached. And I think that will be a not very favorable state of affairs. While if people become more more human, more ethical, besides working on their intellect, yeah, I think it will be better for us to develop more well-rounded humans.
And I think there's an opportunity to redefine kind of economic fundamentals also, right? Because modern economics kind of rewards the materialistic intelligence and discourages the non-materialistic intelligence, right? Like if you're some sort of bum, like you just enjoy doing art or hanging out or whatever, you have a hobby, paint, and it's very hard to make a living, so to say. So it's you're dealing with a lot of adversity if you dedicate yourself to a calling like that. Meanwhile, if you're following the sort of the materialistic intelligence path, it's relatively easy to generate wealth, and it's also relatively easy to attribute that wealth generation to yourself rather than to the way that the economy, the kind of the economic fundamentals, the framework works. But maybe this is the opportunity to redefine that. Maybe this is the opportunity to put some value on the non-materialistic things that enrich communities, that make our lives more pleasant, give us more enjoyment. You could even go further and say, well, maybe this is the time to redefine economic fundamentals, to put a value on clean air or on wonderful nature around you, or living in a non-polluted kind of environment, right? It's the same thing, and it's a conversation that's already been had. And actually, if you pay attention, there's a whole generation of people who are ready to have that conversation, right? And I'm very hopeful because of that. Like, I'm super optimistic about it, just because I see people are out there at the level of a whole generation, basically trying to redefine, turning away from the traditional materialistic economic framework and trying to redefine it. How it will look like, I'm not sure. What's the role of AI, of other technologies there? I'm not sure. But I hope that we'll find a way to put some value to the things that were unvalued in the previous framework, right? Peace of mind, happiness, clean environment, clean air, community, and so on.
I would even add to that, we need to become more literate in thinking about character. For instance, if you draw a comparison between a person that is completely arrogant that they are self-made, compare that to a person that has self-awareness, that they owe so much to their community, the place that they worked with, the people who they collaborated with, the people who crossed their paths and share the kind word, etc. If people develop this literacy, I think that it will also help to foster a good way of looking at economy without just being one-sided, lopsided to just stuff and money and material attainment. And with this, it also brings another thing. If people develop literacy regarding character, people also become better at figuring out leadership as well, because leadership it's so important to have excellent character traits associated with leadership as well, for people who are leading to really shine. Leadership demands a lot from people who are dealing with many people, a lot of stuff happening at the same time, and you probably might relate to that. I've seen. And if a person is always panicking with the slightest thing, chances are they probably won't fare well as a leader. But if they are stable, things happen around them, they keep a relatively cheerful state of mind, they deal with adversity healthily, then they can be like a beacon of humanity. They can inspire other people to even model them, to gain these character traits. So another thing that can happen in terms of an economy is more of this modeling, people transferring character traits throughout this schema of modeling. And these are, even though we cannot put a microscope and look at character traits, we cannot even put them on a spreadsheet. It's very difficult to pinpoint them. Some people have even built metaphors about these character traits, kind of pinning gods to the character traits or something and somewhat. But they are very valuable, because excellent character traits, when they are found in a person like Marcus Aurelius or Buddha or whatnot, they can really do groundbreaking changes in history, for mostly for the best. So I also think that it's really important for people to pay more attention to character than to stuff necessarily, even though stuff is important to live.
Yeah, and I think that it's possible to find a balance, right? To make sure that you prioritize the things in your life that make you happy and fulfill you. But also, you gotta put food on the table. That's just the brutal, harsh reality.
This has been a really great time with you, Julian. I think it's a great time to conclude. As I mentioned, I have been enriched by meeting you and by having conversations with you. So you have been a part of my path. Probably I was inspired in one or more occasion. And so I thank you, and thanks so much for this time and this conversation as well, Julian.
Thank you so much, Rogelio. I loved it, and I really appreciate having known you and having this conversation with you as well.